Today is December 3rd, 1998. I'm conducting an interview with Sam Berry, B-E-R-R-Y, born as Berkowitz, B-E-R-K-O-W-I-T-Z. My name is Barbara Byer, B-Y-E-R. We're in Toms River, New Jersey, in the USA. The interview will be in English. Today is December 3rd, 1998. I'm conducting an interview with Sam Berry, B-E-R-R-Y, born as Berkowitz, B-E-R-K-O-W-I-T-Z. My name is Barbara Byer, B-Y-E-R. We're in Toms River, New Jersey. In the USA, the interview will be in English. Can you tell me your name now and spell it, please?
Sam Berry, S-A-M-B-E-R-R-Y.
Your first and second name at birth?
Shlomo Berkovich, S-H-L-O-M-O. Berkowitz, B-E-R-K-O-W-I-T-Z.
Your date of birth, Mr. Berry?
March 21st, 1923.
How old are you now?
77?
And in what city and country were you born?
Slatina, which was the Czechoslovakian Republic.
Your mother's first name
Ethel
and her name before she was married?
Fried,
Spell that.
F-R-I-E-D.
Your father's full name?
Kalman Berkowitz.
How many brothers and sisters did you have in total?
Including half brothers, okay, 7, 10, 14.
Can you tell me, please, about the eldest in the family, the eldest children in the family?
I have to ask, when you say family, you're talking about, you see, I'm from the second wife. You mean my family or my father's first wife?
How many times was your father married?
3 times.
How many children did he have from his first wife?
7.
The first wife's name?
Don't know.
How many children from your mother, the second wife?
Yeah. 3.
And from the third wife, how many?
2.
So let's start then with the names you remember from the first wife. And those are your half siblings?
Right. Hansa, Benny, Edel, Helen, Hannah, Frida. I think that just about covers it now.
And from your mother, the siblings?
Well, I was the oldest. My brother Mendel and my sister Frida. And by the way, my mother did die of childbirth, which would have been the 4th.
And how old were you when your mother died?
4.
What happened to you and the other children in that
Well,
family?
Well, once my mother died, of course my father couldn't take care of us, so we were split up. I was brought to my father's mother, my grandmother, and my brother and sister, they went to my mother's parents.
And where were the older children from the first wife? Where were they?
They were being raised by the family of the first wife. Some of them eventually wound up in the United States, and some stood back in Slatina.
How much contact did you have with those siblings, those half-siblings from the first marriage?
None.
And how often did you get to see your full siblings?
During my lifetime, if I remember correctly, maybe twice.
How was that for you, knowing you had a full brother and a full sister and not being able to see them?
Well, I was still a child myself, so I did not fully realize that until I became a little bit older. I remember when I was brought to to my mother's parents, my grandparents, for the first time. Uh, I had mixed emotions because I just didn't know. I didn't know any better. I had no specific things about it. I would have liked to be together, but I knew I have nothing to say in the matter, or nothing I can do. And so we just left it at that.
And how close over the years did you become with your full sibling?
Not very close at all, because when I went there, I was only there visiting like maybe a week, and then they brought me back to my grandmother, because where they grew up, that was Romania, and where I grew up, it was the Czechoslovakian Republic. So there was a problem crossing the border, and then I needed somebody to take me there, and really there was nobody to do it.
In which country did the half-siblings live?
Romania.
So what contact did you have with them?
Oh, I'm sorry, they have siblings? No, they have siblings. Some of them lived in Solotino, the village where I grew up, and it's like some of them came to the States. But even with the ones in Solotino, I had no personal contact, so to speak of. I might have seen them occasionally on the street, or something like that, but no personal. In other words, we didn't go to each other houses or anything like that.
Why do you suppose that was?
I have no idea. I guess we were just not grown up together, and nobody did anything about it.
And how about your father? How often did you get to see him?
My father, after what I can remember, when I was getting to be a little bit bigger already, 7, 8, 9, I might have seen him. He might have come maybe 3 times to Slotino, and a couple of times I went over to stay with them for like about a week. Now again, I must say that where he lived at the time was Romania. So, and this was Czechoslovakia, it was the same problem, but also there was no contact really, because he had his troubles. When I say troubles, he had a hard time making a living. He was working in a wood processing place or whatever. So the only time when he really had off was on holidays, and you couldn't walk, so to speak, that far, and you couldn't travel because you were still religious. So it became very hard to get together, for one. And number two, the financial situation wasn't that good either. In other words, he did not have the means to, let's say, hire a carriage or a wagon or something to come to me, or somebody to pay to take me to him. There was not enough money. He had a very hard time making a living.
And how about the third marriage? What children from that marriage did you?
There were 2 children, a boy and a girl. I do not remember the names. And like I said, I went there to visit them once, twice, for a few days. And that's it. I do have no other recollections.
What were your father's parents' names, your grandmother and your grandfather?
My grandmother was Itorokl. My grandfather was Kalman, but he passed at a very early age, as a matter of fact, because my father was named after him. So like I said, my grandmother, I think she was a widow all her life, so to speak.
And what do you remember about your grandmother?
She was a very hard-working, determined woman. And from what I could see as a small child, she went through the same thing before me. She raised another grandchild. And she tried to make the best of it. She made sure that I went to school. She made sure I went to Cheder. Matter of fact, in my opinion at that time, I think it's too much. But, and always tried to make things for me. I remember she didn't have any money, so to speak of. The only thing what she lived on was what her children would send her from the United States sometimes. And she wanted to make me an outfit for the high holidays. And she used to wear 6 skirts she would have. She would wear one on top of the other. And she took one skirt and she cut it up and she made me a pair of pants. And, okay, I said I'm not going to get emotional.
What do you remember about those pants?
Very, very hard-working, giving lady.
What holiday was it?
Hmm.
What holiday was it that you got these pants?
I don't remember. I know that we preferred Passover for some reason. We preferred the Passover holiday. Maybe I preferred it better because it was a nicer holiday than the high holidays, because the high holidays we had to go to the temple and we would go in the morning and stay there all day till the sun came down. And she knew that I liked Passover. The only other reason I also liked Passover was that she couldn't read or write, and I was pretty good in Cheder. I was one of the better students, and we lived right next door to my aunt, which was her daughter, and they had 3 children. She had 3 children. She was also a widow.
What was your aunt's name?
Slamovich.
And the children?
And the children, there was a boy, Kalman, and there was a daughter, Faiga, and another daughter, Hannah. And on Passover, I would do the Seder. So I felt kind of, big, right? As a child to do that,
If you had to remember one thing about your grandmother, what would the fondest memory of her be?
Like I said, she made sure that I went to Cheder. But she, with all her troubles and problems she had, she was also a very proud lady. And she didn't want to put me, there was a Cheder in the village, a Talmud Torah, which was for needy children that they couldn't pay. And they would go over there to Cheder, and then they had private Cheders, which they had to pay for the teacher. And she didn't want me to go to the Talmud Torah. She wanted me to go to a private Cheder. Well, anyway, she couldn't pay. She didn't have any money. So she went to the rabbi there. We called him a rabbi, and she made a deal with him. Once a month or so, I would bring him a chicken or a goose, or whatever she could get, and then she would also give him, because, like I said, she used to make dealings with the neighbors there. and she would get corn. And I would take the corn to the mill and grind it, and I would bring that to the teacher as a part payment. So that would be the corn and the chicken and a goose, and sometimes if she would have a little money, if she would got something from the States, she would make sure that she would send him something. And the rabbi was very understanding. I'm sure that it didn't cover the full thing, but he kept me, and that's how I remember. What she did for me.
How would you describe your relationship with her? How would you describe your relationship with her?
Well, as a child, of course, I thought she was too strict. When I say too strict, like I went to public school, and in the morning, I would go, most of the time, I would go to Cheder first for like an hour and a half, go to public school, which was almost the whole day, and then after public school, go back to Cheder for a couple of hours. And Sunday, of course, school was 5 days a week. Sunday, I went all day to Cheder. And Saturday, she would insist that I go to shul, and then from shul, coming home. And me as a young boy, I wanted to go with the children, play soccer or whatever, run around, and she wouldn't permit it. So I thought at that time that she was a little too strict, but now, of course, I know different.
So you would describe your relationship as?
Well, she was actually my parent. She took care of me. I'm sure my children feel the same way about me, that at times I was too strict.
And what did you know about your grandparents on your mother's side?
Nothing, practically nothing. Like I say, the only time I went there once, I think twice, I'm not even sure. I remember once, because it was a special occasion, there was a wedding, and it involved my mother's brother, and he married a girl from the Czechoslovakian side. So the wedding was there, and they brought me to the wedding, and I wound up going to them. That's how I wound up going to my grandparents from my mother's side, and that was the first time that I actually met my own brother and sisters, as I can remember.
And how was it when you met them?
It was very, very emotional, and they couldn't take them along for some reason. I don't know why they didn't take them to the wedding. So they stayed home alone. And I remember when it was a horse and carriage, like they took us to the village, and they were waiting on the side street. And it was very touchy. But I only stayed there maybe a week, and then they had to take me back. They could not take care of 3 children.
How was it for you when you had to part?
The what?
How was it for you when you had to leave?
It's funny, I do not remember. I just don't know. I don't know how I left, and I don't even know how I got back to my grandmother. I just don't remember.
What was the emotional part for you?
It was very hard, and I kind of felt that somehow I'm being shortchanged. I shouldn't use that word. I'm not getting the things which a lot of other children do, even though I never paid any attention to it before. But at that time, I felt it more, than normally.
What did your grandmother tell you about the other children and why they had to live apart from you?
I do not believe that she told me too much. We did not have a lot of conversations. I know they tried to make me comfortable as much as possible, and but that's as far as I can recall.
And so how was it for you being brought up with your grandmother?
When I started to realize what is actually the situation between me, the difference between me and most of my friends, I felt kind of deprived. Because sometimes the neighbors would come and they would try to help me, and they would call me, which I didn't like, by the way. They would say, "Oh, Nebich," in Yiddish it means, I think you know what it means. "Oh, Nebich Shloima," and I never liked that for some reason, and I hated it when they tried to be especially nice to me, so to say, to do little things, and things like that. I didn't like that, and I didn't want to be treated any differently than the rest of my friends. Or we would go, like children, we would go, sleigh riding or whatever, and they always made sure, hey, watch out for Shlomi, don't let him get hurt, and I hated that. And I distinctly remember we used to go down a hill. We used to go, of course, we didn't have no big fancy sleds or anything like that. We would tie together the sticks or the thing from the corn. We would tie them together and slide down. And this couple, they were sitting, and we would go by down the street, because the streets were snow covered. There was no cars, there were just wagons once in a while. And I came down, and she says, "Oh, watch out, Shlomi, you're going to rip your pants, and then your grandmother's going to have to get you new pants. You better watch out." And it's interesting that I don't remember 80% what happened to me, but I remember that. And I hated it. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is they try to be nice and watch out, so to speak.
Why did you object to them looking out for you?
Because I felt that they felt sorry for me, and I didn't want that. I don't think I would have objected if they would have helped me. Excuse me. And in the other ways, in the later years, they did, some of them, because, but I was already bigger, and I guess they also realized that to do a little bit differently, because, but anyway, you're probably going to get to that later.
Where actually did your grandmother live in Slatina?
In Slatina. I don't know the name. At that time, we didn't have any street names. It was just in Yenemek, which meant that corner of the village. We happened to live in Yenemek, whatever that. The other thing, then when Hungary took over, they named the streets, but I do not recall.
What kind of house did your grandmother live in?
It was a two-room. Of course, everything was wood. It was not. It was a two-room house. There was a, well, so-called living room. There wasn't over there. They didn't have such a thing as a living room. That was the big room where they had like a table, and where the beds were, and there was like a not a couch, but something like a closet, wood made. That was the big room. And then we had a kitchen, and that room was the nice room because it had a wooden floor. And then we had a kitchen which was a dirt floor. And the kitchen had a stove which was, with wood. We would rent, and we would heat it with wood. And in one corner there was a bench, and there was a couple of buckets there for water, and like a bucket underneath. And my grandmother, she would, every Friday, she would refinish the floor on the kitchen. And sometimes in the oven, it was like one, the oven and the stove. The stove and then behind was like the oven. And she would, what everybody did more or less, put Friday night, prepare for Saturday, put the cholent, and everything, because we wouldn't cook. And so that was a two-room house, and then we had, there was like a shed outside where we'd keep the wood, and we had some chickens. It was like a combination, everything, the chickens and the geese, whatever we had, and the wood and other stuff or whatever. And if she would get really mad at me in the winter, she would say, "Go sleep in the shack," and I did a lot of times. And
what would cause her to become angry?
well, all kinds of things, but it would happen, like if, especially when I was getting bigger already. And you go with the friends and you hang out. I would come home too late. I joined the Chalutzim. There was a Zionist organization, and I would like to go there, because we got together, a lot of young people, and it was kind of fun, And if I would come home late, she would be mad, and she didn't throw me out. She just locked the door. I couldn't get into the house. And so I knew already that I had to go into the shed, But I accepted that. I knew that she was worried about me, and she wanted to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. I never held that against her.
What kind of neighbors did you have, Mr. Berry?
My next door neighbor was my aunt, and with the 3 children. And she was a widow also. Her husband died in the First World War. And they did a lot, I don't want to say raising me, but they did help me a lot, because they knew that my grandmother, she was already an old lady, and she couldn't do a lot of things. She couldn't understand a lot of things, and they did that for me. They made sure that if they knew that my grandmother, she didn't have enough food or something prepared, they would give me, and they would make sure that I'm clothed, and take me to the barber, things like that, which my grandmother would never do.
We're going to change tapes now. Me about your aunt and how she helped.
Yeah, they were like second parents to me, so to speak, because the 2 daughters, they were younger people, and they more or less knew more what a boy would need. And like I said, they would make sure that I'm clothed properly and taken care of, and whatever. If I had any problems, I would go to them.
And how about the other neighbors that weren't your relatives?
Well, that was the other neighbors were across the street. There was already across the street and to the other side of us, there was Romanians. Some of them, they just had their houses there, and then they either worked on farms or had some farms. Going all the way down, there was like 3 houses down. There was a church on top of the, because we lived, our house was located just below a little hill. So on top of the hill, there was, to the left there was a church. Then a few houses to the other side, there was